Continuing on episode number 96 of the Primetime Rundown. Joining us here is manager and editor-in-chief of SB Nation's Blogging the Boys, covering the Dallas Cowboys. Coming back on to join us once again, RJ Ochoa. RJ, good to see you, my friend. How are things down in the Lone Star State?
They're great. They're warm. It's August, so it's really muggy, obviously. But that's a sign the football season is here. It's an exciting time. And so just kind of waiting for these next 2 weeks to fly by so that things can kind of fall into their normal routine for the next 4 months or so.
Yeah, really crazy stuff to see what's going on in Jerry World. We get a chance to see, obviously, about Ezekiel Elliott. We'll start off with him just because, there's a lot of talk, and what we've heard, especially up here in New York, obviously with Mike being a Giants fan. Oh, is Ezekiel Elliott, is he done? Is Tony Pollard beginning to take over things? Is this going to be running back 1 and 2? What's the deal with the running backs down there in Mike McCarthy's system?
I wish I could tell you. I mean, I think I can tell you, obviously. The Cowboys love being the team that feeds Zeke. The Cowboys love, the Cowboys won 3 Super Bowls in the 90s, obviously, with an incredible running game and a Hall of Fame running back who's the NFL's all-time leading rusher, Emmitt Smith. And the Cowboys are that person who goes to their high school reunion wearing the leather jacket, telling the same stories, making the same jokes. Remember when Jenkins, passed out in so-and-so's yard? Like, they're just, banking on nostalgia and living in the past. And they're kind of building their football team that way. It's unfortunate to say. Zeke Elliott is not the best running back on this team anymore. He's valuable. This argument generally turns into he's trash or he's amazing among fans. And the truth is obviously somewhere in between. He can contribute, he can help, but the idea that he needs 20, 25 carries a game or something like that is really archaic and really old. I mean, the Cowboys, he was injured last year in week 5 against the Carolina Panthers, and they trotted him out there. I mean, even when healthy, I don't think he's the best runner on this team. And so they want to live and die by that, and it's proven to be costly in the past. And so the Cowboys have said that Tony Pollard's going to be involved. They've kind of towed the company line. It's hard to believe them. They've said that in the past. Kellen Moore has been the Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator for 3 years. Tony Pollard's been on this team for 3 years, and we just haven't seen it happen yet. And so it's kind of hard to believe that now it's going to, just because the Cowboys said it once again.
Mike, take it away.
Yeah, just building off of that Zeke thing, is there really a sense that it has to work based on the money? And is there going to be, Jerry coming, from above that, one way or another, damn it, he has to get those carries because we're paying him this much, even if it's not the best thing?
I don't know that it is financially driven. I don't know that it truly is. I know a lot of people believe that. I don't know that the Cowboys want to be proven right on the dollars they've spent. I think it's bigger than that. I think this is their guy. This is the face of their team. It's interesting. Zeke was drafted, and obviously Dak Prescott as well, as the team was exiting Valley Ranch, their longtime world headquarters. They had just built the Star in Frisco, and they moved in kind of right before the season started. So that draft class, when they were rookies, that 2016 class, still got to have a few, OTAs and mini camps and whatnot at Valley Ranch. And I vividly remember they took a picture on the practice field. It's kind of, the last sort of moments at Valley Ranch. And at the time, they had Zeke Elliott kind of sit right next to Romo, kind of the past and the future kind of coalescing in this Venn diagram of moment. And so, in this era, it is an era of Dallas Cowboys football where the Star has been their home, where everything has kind of been about Dak Prescott. Zeke Elliott has been their face outside of Dak, obviously. And so I think it's again, the finances matter, but I think they really this is who they want to be. I mean, there's people who you could take, one right to go east, but some people want to take 3 lefts, you know what I mean? And they're just the people who want to take 3 lefts and go west-south before they ultimately wind up eastward.
Yeah, and as Patrick Starr would say, Weast. Mike, go ahead, continue on there.
Yeah, with the rest of the offense, of course, you have Amari Cooper gone, of course, now, and CeeDee Lamb takes a much larger role, as you would expect. Of course, you had Dalton Schultz also break out last year. What does the offense really look like? Can CeeDee Lamb be that wide receiver one, have that sort of potential? And can Schultz really continue last year's performance, or was that just a flash in the pan?
I certainly believe in both CeeDee and Dalton Schultz, and I think we've seen the appropriate things that you can see through preseason. They haven't played, but through this time of year, through training camp and whatnot. And so obviously, until you reach live action, things aren't fully known. But there's all the reason in the world to believe that those things are going to click. I maintain, it's not a popular thing to relitigate it, but the Cowboys trading away of Amari Cooper continues to age poorly. At least the value that they were able to obtain or not obtain in that trade. And so, I mean, if you're talking about the skill position players on this team, yeah, Dak's obviously awesome. And you theoretically have 2 running backs you can count on. You've got a great top receiver in CeeDee Lamb, one of the better tight ends in the NFL in Dalton Schultz, but this offensive line is kind of, a ticking time bomb. The moment we're recording this, actually, I have a story open that I'm writing because Tyron Smith just walked off the practice field with an apparent injury on Wednesday evening. And so, the potential severity of that is unknown, may not be a big deal at all. But Tyron has, I mentioned Valley Ranch. He has not played a full season for this team since they operated out of Valley Ranch in 2015. Every year that Dak Prescott has been the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, he has missed some time. He's played 13 games over the last 2 seasons combined. And so, I mean, that would seemingly be something that you would build a safeguard against. That would seemingly build something that you would plan around. But the Cowboys didn't. The Cowboys went about this season banking on a second-year, 4th-round pick and Josh Ball, who they redshirted a year ago, and a rookie, Matt Waletzko, one of their 5th-round picks this year. Actually, the pick they obtained from the Amari Cooper trade. And so, I mean, what happens? What happens, not if, but when Tyron Smith has to miss time? You can have all the talented skill position players in the world, but if your offensive line is crumbling, Dak Prescott could be the greatest quarterback ever and still not have enough time to fully operate.
Really crazy stuff. Now, looking over now that you brought up, obviously, where it's not aging well, the trade, Amari Cooper heading off to Cleveland. Now, you also look at the most likely option at wide receiver too when he is healthy, Michael Gallup, but he blew out his ACL last year. He was given a nice contract in this offseason, but now Jerry Jones just came out a couple hours ago and did say, at the time we're recording this, of course, did come out a couple hours ago and say that he's not going to be placed on the PUP. He's going to be ready for week 1, or so. That's not verbatim, but that's pretty much what we're seeing here, and that's, I would say, what you see, there too. Not only, I guess, the update I would ask you on Gallup, but, is he good enough to be that, a solid complement to CeeDee Lamb?
Just for full clarity, because I'm sure a lot of your listeners are fantasy players and things like that, so I don't want anybody to bank on Gallup. Gallup himself said recently that he is not going to play in week 1. That was the farthest out he went. But to your point, Jerry did say that they're not placing him on the PUP list, which leads you to believe that he can return. They believe he can return between weeks 2 through 4. So, they don't want to obviously kind of put him on ice until week 5. That's good news. And I certainly believe, we've seen him be a complimentary receiver to Amari Cooper. So he's played that role before. It's just a matter of, can he come back from the torn ACL? Obviously, it's been a long time since torn ACLs were career enders in sports. And so that's really not anything that anybody's worried about when it comes to Gallup. It's just a matter of, okay, when is that going to happen? What's their record going to be? Their first 2 games are against the Buccaneers and the Bengals. Are they going to be 0-2? They're going to be 1-1. What's going to happen there? How, what's the stress level going to be whenever Michael Gallup comes back, whenever that ultimately winds up being?
RJ, the next question before I ship it over to Mike is, obviously we know how last season ended. We know it was against San Francisco. We know it was the spike. It never officially occurred. The game eventually came to a close. And that was a big deal, obviously. I remember me and Mike, we were talking about it a ton, after that had all came to fruition. What do you feel that, or what have you seen rather, or observed, if you will, that this team has potentially learned from that game? Because they simply cannot win playoff games. There is just something there. And again, despite me being an Eagles fan, I want to see the Cowboys at least win a playoff game. I do. I really do.
It's funny. Dak Prescott was interviewed by Peter King last week and was asked about this specifically. He was asked about the final moment. Would he do anything differently? And he said no. He said that, if he had done anything differently, he just wishes instead of spiking anything, he would just run up and that day in practice, he'd thrown a Hail Mary on the final play of practice and successfully landed it in the arms of Dennis Houston for a touchdown against the Chargers. And so, you know, Dak, I think, has really kind of started the offseason on a very awkward foot. At least it felt awkward for anyone who's watched him. Dak has always been the person who has said the right thing. I mean, he has been incredible face of the Dallas Cowboys, which is a difficult thing to be. But after that game, you may recall Cowboys fans threw some garbage and some debris at officials.
Yep.
And Dak Prescott was asked about that in his post-game press conference and said good for them, and just kind of egged it on, which was a really bad look. And the Cowboys had a problem complaining about officials all through the end of last season. They lost to the Arizona Cardinals, and CeeDee Lamb, had a comment. DeMarcus Lawrence had a comment about how the Cowboys were up against more than the Cardinals that day. And so it's troubling, certainly. And when Dak was asked about it by Peter King, he said he wouldn't do anything, but he said that he felt like things could have been executed better from everybody involved. He mentioned himself, the offensive line, the official who spotted the ball. And so it was just a little bit of a, okay, so are we blaming the officials or are we not? Like who's taking the responsibility for this? I might be making a mountain out of that molehill, but the bothersome thing, I mean, that's one of the weird things that's happened in the last few months is Mike McCarthy said that they had practiced that over and over and over again, but the mechanics of what they did were incorrect. I mean, so were you practicing it incorrectly this entire time? I mean, it all felt like lip service. It all felt like cover up, and it all felt like deflecting responsibility for coming up short in a big time moment.
Brutal. Mike Szabo, take it away.
Yeah, so RJ, just building off of that, is this a year where if the Dallas Cowboys, again, do not win a playoff game, Mike McCarthy is gone from the head coaching position?
I mean, that it's such a difficult thing to forecast because, I don't know if it's obvious. This is a unique team to cover, and this is a team that operates in a unique way. I mean, a few weeks after their season ended, Jerry Jones openly dangled the job security of Mike McCarthy on the home of the Cowboys, 105 through the Fan. Mike McCarthy had a rebuttal on the Rich Eisen show and kind of clapped back. And, the Sean Payton factor is there. It's impossible to ignore. And you could argue that's not the Joneses' fault, but they've made their love and their affection for him very well known over the years. That is a factor that Jason Garrett had to deal with. This offseason, actually, Mike Florio in his book had a story about how the Cowboys had a deal to trade for Sean Payton in the early days of 2019. But I think it was that same weekend was when Anthony Davis requested a trade from the Pelicans, and the ownership group, which owns both teams, didn't want to say goodbye to both Sean Payton and Anthony Davis. In the same year would have been a bad look for the city and whatnot. So they've had one foot in, Sean Payton for a very long time, and so obviously he's a free agent to some degree. He's going to be on Fox. He's going to be talking a lot. He's going to be talking publicly. I have a job to do, so I'm going to transcribe those quotes and make the content that I have to, obviously, and stir the pot in that way. And even if you don't buy Sean Payton, I don't know who doesn't, but Dan Quinn, again, Mike McCarthy's job was dangled in the name of retaining one of his subordinates. And, you can be a fan of Dan Quinn or not, but that's kind of a scummy thing to do to Mike McCarthy. I'm not Mike McCarthy's biggest fan, but I do maintain that he is in a Kobayashi Maru. This is such an impossible thing. I mean, he has to have on-field success, to your question, Mike. But so within that, navigating all of the off-the-field drama, we've traded away Amari Cooper, we've cut Lyle Collins. We're building your team based on having an elite run game in the year 2022 and a defense fighting 100 years of history that says it's going to regress from a volume and a statistical standpoint. So they're building this in the most backwards ways possible. And then at the end of it, going to say, well, Mike, you failed, you're fired. And maybe they can live with themselves if they do that. But it just, again, it feels kind of like a wrong thing to do. But, this is the Cowboys.
It to me also, you brought up, RJ, the perfect segue about the defense regressing. We know last year Trevon Diggs had a whopping 11 picks, 11 interceptions, fantastic numbers. Chances are very good that I have a better chance of winning the lottery than him getting 11 interceptions for a second straight year. Now that we hear about this Tyron Smith injury, we hear about this we know obviously about the Collins release. He's no longer there. The offensive line, when, not if Tyron Smith misses time, if there are some offensive woes and the defense needs to step it up, obviously all eyes are going to be on Micah Parsons to help things, to get things going. But we're only a few years out, RJ, from the Dallas Cowboys defense being historically one of the worst. When we see the regression, how much regression are we going to see in 2022?
I mean, obviously that is difficult to forecast, but you're right. Trayvon Diggs isn't going to have 11 interceptions. I don't know that Micah Parsons is going to equal his sack total from last year. I think that's more likely. I mean, that's a more controllable thing, obviously, than Trayvon having all these interceptions, just because Trayvon can only guard the guy who has the ball thrown to him, if the ball is thrown to him, and so. I mean, it isn't, you can do this with a lot of teams, right? Like you can play God, if you will, and you can look at specific moments and say, well, if these 3-5 moments or whatever change, then everything is completely different for that team. And if you look at the Cowboys last year, if we perform that exercise, this ultimately wasn't the most consequential thing, but Trayvon Diggs had the pick six against the New England Patriots that really lifted that game for the Cowboys. There was still some back and forth after that, but that was a huge factor. Against the Chargers, near the end of that game, Justin Herbert threw an interception in the end zone to Damontae Kazee. Cowboys wound up winning that game on a last-second field goal. The Cowboys lost the season opener to the Buccaneers by a last-second field goal of Tampa. However, it looked a lot closer than it ultimately was because right before all that kind of happened, Chris Godwin fumbled at the 1-yard line and Dallas was able to recover it. If Chris Godwin scores, that game is out of question for Dallas. And so, I mean, again, if you just move a handful of moments, if you just change history, if you butterfly effect a few things, you go from 12-5 to 9-8. And so do all those things happen to your benefit this year? Does all the good fortune continue for you? And, on the subject of regression to the mean, I mean, this team was very injury plagued in 2020. We spoke about that a year ago. They rebounded all the way to the opposite end of the extreme as far as that was concerned. Yes, Dak Prescott missed a game, and Tyron Smith missed time, but for the most part, they were a largely healthy team. In fact, the two teams who missed the most amount of games to injuries in 2020 were the Cowboys and the 49ers, who obviously beat them in the playoffs and wound up in the title game. And so, I mean, these are all fair questions. They're all unknowns, but if you base it off of history, they're likely going to lose more games to injuries this year. They're likely not going to have as many takeaways on defense. They're likely going to regress on the offensive side of the ball due to the loss of talent. So what's the reason? Like the reason they're supposed to be good is because they play in a crummy division and have the best quarterback in it. I mean, you're not just like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You're standing outside of the haystack saying, take away my magnifying glass, take away everything, tie one arm behind my back. I've got this needle in this haystack.
It's a pretty good way of observing the Dallas Cowboys. Mike Szabo, your final one.
Yeah, so RJ, just lastly, I guess to put that all into context, where do you see this Cowboys team in 2022 finishing?
I kind of intimated it there. I mean, look, I've sat here and kind of trashed them for the last, 17 minutes. It's difficult to find fewer than 10 wins. It really is. And I think, just based off your questions, I think the consensus here is that this team is going to regress. But say they win, I think conservatively 4 games against the division. Say they split with Philly and say they drop one somehow, some way against Washington or New York. They're both kind of improved. So that's 4 games right there. They play the AFC South, as do the Eagles, obviously. Do we see Dallas losing to Houston, to Jacksonville? I'm not a believer in Indianapolis personally. But either that, Indianapolis, Tennessee, whatever, and they played Tennessee in the penultimate week of the regular season. Is that even Ryan Tannehill? Is that Malik Willis? I mean, so I'm willing to give them 3 wins there. So we're at 7. Like the Eagles, they obviously play the NFC North. Are the Bears beating the Cowboys? Are the Lions beating the Cowboys? I'm not buying all this hard knocks love and whatnot. I mean, so again, without really breaking a sweat, we can kind of get them to 9 wins and then, they'll probably lose one of these that they're supposed to win. They'll probably win one they're supposed to lose. So if the over under were set at 10.5, I'd have a hard time with it. But I really think that 10 wins is kind of their floor. However, that being the case, I mean, the last 5 instances in which the Cowboys have won the NFC East, they have failed, in incredible fashion the following season. This is a team that has not been to the playoffs in consecutive years since 2006 and 2007, a team that has not won double-digit games in consecutive years since 1995 and 1996. This is a division, as you well know, Joey, that has not featured a back-to-back champion since 2004. Now, none of that has anything to do with who the 2022 Dallas Cowboys are, but it's more history. It's more unlikelihood that is facing them. And so, I mean, I know that they will be dramatic. I know that they will be theatrical. I know that I will hopefully be able to, be very good at my job based off of the circus that they are. But I expect them to disappoint because they usually tend to in this moment. And what I will say, my last point, is normally that the previous 4 instances when they've been coming off of a successful season, normally the consensus is, all right, they loaded up. They were close last year. They got robbed for whatever reason. Dez caught it, blah, blah, blah. They've added. They're going to be back, and they're going all the way now. The vibe is the complete opposite. I mean, I can't recall any NFL team that won a division and was so good in certain areas. I mean, they technically were the number 1 offense in the NFL. I think that's a little bit inflated, but still, that is so universally doubted, and rightfully so. So they are in this really weird, awkward place where you can talk yourself into them, but then you feel foolish for doing so.
Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Ochoa, managing editor or manager and editor-in-chief, there we go, of SB Nation's Blogging the Boys, covering the Dallas Cowboys. RJ, thank you so much for joining us once again. We truly appreciate it, and we know we'll definitely have you back on at some point soon.
Thanks a lot, guys. Y'all have a great week.
All right, thank you.